Our discussion today will be on individual irregularities, but we're going to focus on just two of the individual irregularities. We're going to focus on examinees who leave and return, and examinees who leave and do not return. Now, remember, we're only looking at these two individual irregularities. Now, this is for standard time only, so this discussion only references standard time testing. And remember, we're looking at spring 2020, so make sure as we go through this discussion that you have your manual with you. All right, now, before we begin this, it is your responsibility to make sure you read all parts of the irregularity section. Make sure you understand the difference between group irregularities and the different scenarios and what to do in each case, and make sure you understand individual irregularities and what to do in each case. So it is, again, your responsibility as a room supervisor and as a proctor to understand all aspects of this. If you have any questions on anything that you read, make sure you discuss this with your test coordinator. Okay, so let's go back to individual irregularities. An individual irregularity is one that affects a single person or several individuals involved in a single circumstance, such as communicating answers to each other. If an individual irregularity occurs, follow the instructions outlined for that irregularity. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is individuals who leave and return. So here's some examples. Examinees need to use the restroom. The examinee feels ill and needs to leave the room. Examinee returns late from break. Now let's go back to this one here. So it is possible that the examinee may not feel well, may need just leave the room and then come back. It is also possible that the examinee could be ill enough to where they do not come back. So there are two situations where examinees can be ill. So they can be ill and still come back. They can be ill and not come back. Okay, so we're only going to look at, for in this little part right here, students who leave and return. So examinees need to use the restroom, examinee feels ill and needs to leave the room, examinees return late from break. So remember, we're only looking at standard time here, standard time. So standard time is where students take the test all in one day. It's all 4 tests, and you must do test 1 first, test 2. So test 1 is English, and then test 2 is math. So it must be in that order: test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. There is a break between test 2 and test 3. So if in terms of using the restroom, if a student uses the restroom, you still must do an irregularity report. Now the irregularity report is in the back of your manual, so just make sure you go to the back of your manual and you find it. So in this case, it was on page 63. Your test coordinator will make multiple copies of this for you. So you'll notice that on this irregularity report, there's a section for individual irregularities, and then there's a section for group irregularities. For individual irregularities, there's only 3 rows. So if the student's going to the restroom and then comes back, I would just go ahead and just use as many rows as possible in that case. All right, so there are irregularities, prohibited behavior, I should say, as well. So irregularities, prohibited behavior, where the student's answer document would have to be voided. In that case, if the student's answer document is voided, because that irregularity report needs to be attached to the voided answer document. So in that case, you would just use one sheet for that student. All right, so in our scenario though, we are only focusing on students who leave and return and students who leave and do not return. So in both cases, you're not going to be voiding anything. So when we fill this out, you'll notice that I'll check off not voided in our examples. Okay? All right. Now we'll come back to this in a few minutes. Okay, so let's continue talking about individuals who leave and return. All right, the first thing you must do, anytime a student leaves the room, you must collect and secure the examinee's test materials. When they come back, you give it back to them. All right, do not let the students leave the materials on the desk. You must collect them and secure and then give them back to the student when they come back. All right, now the next thing you got to do, when they leave, you must time the examinee's departure. You must time the examinee's departure when they leave. So, for example, you have student A leaves, let's say during, and let's say this is test 2. Leaves during test 2, let's say it's 9:05, and then comes back during the same test, test 2, let's say it's 9:15. So they've lost 10 minutes, let's say. All right, so they've lost 10 minutes. For whatever reason, they leave, come back. They've lost 10 minutes. All right, now remember these examples only references examinees who need to use the restroom, examinees feels ill and needs to leave the room, examinee returns late from break. Now, again, there's all kinds of things that can happen. Examinee could say, I'm going to the restroom, and they do, but in the process, they take a cell phone out. And so that's a prohibited behavior, which changes this whole scenario. So anything can happen, but we're only focusing on students that are honest. They go to the restroom, they come back. Nothing happens in the process. But again, if a student says they're going to the restroom, comes back, and in the process they were using a cell phone and someone saw it, that is prohibitive behavior. And then in that case, the answer document is voided. Okay, but we're only dealing with students who leave, come back, and nothing else happened in the process. All right, now so if a student leaves a room, again, record the lost time on the Irregularity Report. So we're going to go to that in a little while. All right. If a student returns during the same test, now remember, if a student leaves and then comes back, remember they cannot make up the lost time. So they lost 10 minutes. You're going to record that in the Irregularity Report. They cannot make it up. So that's what this is saying. So if an examinee returns during the same test, have the examinee continue testing where they left off and stop when time is called in the room. Lost time cannot be made up. If the examinee returns during a later test, so let's say student B, let's say left to go to the restroom during test 1, or said they were ill and they just needed to walk out for a few. So let's say test 1 was, I'm making this up, 8:30. Came back during test 2, and let's say test 2, when they came back, it was 8:50, let's say. All right, so that is a total of what, 20 minutes, but on the Regularity Report you need to write it in a different way. All right, but what this is saying is that remember, they left at test 1, they cannot come back to test 1. They've lost that time. They must continue on test 2, and that time is lost as well. So any lost time cannot be made up. So if an examinee returns during a later test, do not let the examinee go back to a previous test. So if they come back on test 2, they cannot go to test 1. Have the examinee start the current test. So the current test meaning, in this case, in this example, test 2. And stop when time is called. Lost time cannot be made up. All right, so let's go to the Irregularity Report. So when filling out an Irregularity Report, you got to make sure that all this information up here is filled out. There's something there. So you have your school name, you have the room number, you have the ACT high school code. If you don't know it, ask the test coordinator. Your city, state, and then the test date. So in our case, in this example, we are talking about standard time only, not accommodations, standard time only. So you would have, in this case, March 17. You would put the student's name here. It is important you put the test booklet form and serial number. So the serial number you can get from the room form that you completed in the administration report, and then the test booklet form. And let's say the test booklet form is B70. You would indicate the time the student left and in which test. So let's say the student left at 9:05 was test 2. If the student went to the restroom, let's say it was a restroom, there's no restroom up here, so you're going to put other. So we check other. And then student comes back, student's not going to do makeup, so you're going to say no. So you must have something here, so you're going to say no, and it's not voided. Okay? So in those two scenarios we're going to talk about, nothing's going to be voided. There's no prohibited behavior that occurred. Student went to the restroom, student became ill, came back, nothing occurred in the process. Student did not take notes out, student did not cheat, student did not use a cell phone, so we're assuming no prohibited behavior occurred. In that case, then this whole thing would change. All right. Now, let's say Jane Doe, sorry, the explanation, so you have to put something there. So you would say student went to the restroom and it took 5 minutes. So remember, one of the things you had to do was on number 2, you would time the examinee's departure, and then you record the lost time on the irregularity report. Okay, so you record the lost time in the irregularity report. So students who leave and return. Okay, so let's suppose Jane Doe, let's say went to became ill. Let's say became ill, wasn't feeling well. So left the room and came back to take the test. All right, so did not go home, just came back. That's a different scenario. They go home. So came back to take the test. So you would have the test booklet, the room form, the time the student left. So let's say it was 10:10 during test 3. And let's say the student was ill. So you put ill here. If the student went to the restroom, you would put other. Okay? So you'd say student became ill, left the room. Now remember, when the student leaves the room, you got to collect the materials. Came back during, let's say, I wrote current test, but you would say test 3. So you put test 3 here, and then you would say how much time was lost. If the student comes back during the next test, let's say test 4, you would say student became ill, left the room, came back during, and then you would say test 4. You would say test 4, and then you would indicate, remember you got to indicate how much time is lost. Okay, so if the student leaves and comes back, you must indicate how much time is lost. So it'd say test 3, the student lost, let's say 15 minutes. And then test 4, the student lost 10 minutes. Okay? And then you would put, remember, nothing's voided, so you would check off not voided. All right, so that's how you would fill this out. So this is a scenario where student leaves and comes back. Leaves and comes back. So student leaves during the same test. This is what you do if students leave and comes back during the next test. All right, so you must indicate time lost for each test. Remember, when they lose the time, they cannot make it up. So before we go into the next part here, let's kind of remind ourselves about if a student leaves and comes back during a future test. They cannot come back to test 1. They cannot come back to the test that they left on. They've lost that time. They must work on the current test. And even the time they lost on the current test cannot be made up. Okay? So whenever a student leaves, comes back, regardless of whether they go to the restroom, if they go to the restroom for 3 minutes, you still must do an irregularity report. All right, now notice I have 2 students here, so nothing was voided. If something was voided, then I would just put 1 student, and because it has to be attached to an answer document. Okay, but that's a later, that would be a later discussion. So that would be something like a prohibitive behavior in that kind of situation. All right, now let's talk about students who leave and do not return. Students who leave and do not return. Okay, now remember, for any irregularity, you have to complete an irregularity report for any irregularity. I would discourage, for restrooms, since there is a break between test 2 and 3, I would discourage restrooms. The students wanting to go to the restroom, because every time a student wants to go to the restroom, you have to do this. You have to complete an irregularity report. Now, if a student becomes ill, you can't say you got to stay in the room. Student says they're not feeling well, just let them go to the restroom, whatever they need to do, and then they come back, you continue. If they don't come back for whatever reason, that's a discussion between you and the test coordinator, then that would be this part here. So examinees who leave and do not return. All right, so examples of examinees who leave and do not return. Examinees become ill. So they become ill enough to where they have to go home and cannot continue testing. Examinee does not return after break. So it is possible that during the break, remember there's a break between test 2 and 3, there's a break between test 2 and 3, it is possible that the examinee, the student, may say, I'm not going to finish this test. All right, well, you know, it happens. Or the examiner leaves before testing is called. We've never had that situation in East Baton Rouge, so that's not going to happen. We've had situations where a student seriously becomes ill and has to go home. And we've had maybe 1 or 2 situations where a student does not return after break. Okay, so make a note of this, that examinees cannot return to an incomplete test. So always keep that in mind. They've lost that time. It is the examinee's best interest to either complete a test before leaving or not begin a new test if they feel they may need to leave. All right? Okay, now, so the first thing you're going to do, just like you did here, so remember when a student left the room, you collected materials, and the student came back, so you gave it back to them. Okay, over here, you're going to collect materials again. In this case, the student doesn't come back, so you're not going to give it back to them. The student did not come back. All right, but here's the next thing you got to discuss. Decide if the test should be scored. Again, that's going to be between you and the test coordinator. Decide if the test should be scored or if the examinee should be scheduled for makeup testing. All right, now here's what that means. So you see this example right here where the student did not come back after break? Let's say the student decided, I don't want to finish this test. Well, it's still going to be scored. So that means they're going to get a very low composite score because they did not take tests 3 and 4, but that's still going to be scored. So if a student does not come back after break, it's still scored. Okay? If a student becomes ill, and they have to go home, then that's a legitimate reason for the student to do a makeup. So in that case, the student would do a makeup. All right, so make sure you understand this. Make sure you understand the difference between is it going to be scored or is it going to be a makeup. So the situation where the student becomes ill and has to go home, that's a makeup. The situation where the student, let's say, after break does not come back, then it's still going to be scored. The student will not do a makeup there unless the student left for a legitimate reason. All right, but that's going to be a discussion between, for this situation where the student leaves after break, that's going to be a discussion between you and the test coordinator and possibly the principal. All right, now, okay, so let's go to the example where the student becomes ill and cannot come back. So in that case, you still have to do an irregularity report. Keep that in mind. Anytime any of these situations here, any irregularities requires an irregularity report. Okay, so if a student becomes ill and has to go home, you as a room supervisor, you have to complete this part, you have to complete this part, all this you have to complete, just like before. Test date, okay? So in this case, you're going to say Jane Doe, whatever the name of the person is. You still have to do this part. You need the serial number and the test room form on here. You need to indicate the time that the student left, the irregularity, so it's called irregularity, the time the student left, and the test. So the student left at 9:10 and test 2, let's say, you put that there. If the student left for an illness, you would say illness. Okay? And then in this case, if the student leaves because the student is just not feeling well, has to go home, then that's a legitimate reason to do a makeup. So I would say yes there. Again, but talk to the test coordinator. The answer document is not voided, so you're going to put not voided here. Okay, not voided. Now let me explain this. If a student leaves because of an illness, then something else has to occur, and that's the test coordinator. That is not, you've completed your part. except you have to write something here. You've completed your part. The rest is test coordinator. Because there's something called where we have to use the word replaced. All right, so the word replaced. So that's the test coordinator that has to do that. So on the answer document, since the student left because of illness, who's going to do a makeup, the test coordinator has to write the word replace and has to do some other things. All right, but as a room supervisor, all you have to do is say the student's name, fill this part out, say illness, schedule for makeup, yes, test is not voided. All right, test is not voided. And then you would give an explanation. You would say student became ill during test 2, did not return. That's all you have to say. And you're done. So as a room supervisor, you're done. It is now the test coordinator that has to do this part on the answer document. And there's some other stuff they have to do for that student. Okay? All right, now, so that's what you would do if a student becomes ill. And it is possible that can happen. So just make sure you know what to do when completing this irregularity report. Okay? Now, let's suppose it's a student that did not return after break. You would do an irregularity report for that student. So same thing. You would fill all this part out. All of this. Everything has to be completed. Everything. Room number. You have to put your room number. You would put the student's name. Again, this part has to be completed. You got to indicate the time and test when it occurred. So in that case, I would say break. And then whatever time the break was, whatever it was, just indicate the time. So let's say the break ended at I'm making this up. Let's say 11 o'clock. So you put 11 o'clock. In that case, I would see there's if you look at here, there's nothing here that indicates a break. So you put other. And see there's nothing that says break or did not return. All right, so you put other. Examinee scheduled for makeup. The examinee did not return after break. If the examinee did not return after break for no legitimate reason, then you would say no. And then you would say not voided. But the test can be scored. If a student leaves for after the break or during the break for no reason, for no legitimate reason, remember, the becoming ill is a legitimate reason. Test is not voided, so that test will be scored. All right, so that test will be scored, but you do have to indicate. You would have to say, student did not return after break. All right, so that's what you do, and as your job, you're done. You're done with this part. That's all you have to do. It is now up to the room supervisor to make sure that the document, the answer document, is with the others to be scored, because that answer document has to be scored. You can't write the word void on there. Student did not return. That's their fault for not returning, unless it was a legitimate reason for not returning. All right, but that's a discussion that you have to have with the test coordinator. And if it's a serious situation, then with the principal. Okay? All right, so I think that's gonna take care of the two more common. These are the more common ones besides the cell phone issue. And remember, cell phone is a prohibitive behavior. Remember, the prohibitive behaviors, they start here. So just make sure, again, you are reading everything on irregularities. Make sure you understand all of the information that's there, because as a room supervisor and as a proctor, you are responsible for anything that happens in that room during testing. Okay, so that should take care of these two individual irregularities. Again, just make sure that if a student goes to if the student leaves the room, that only one examinee may leave the test room at a time. If two more examinees need to leave the room, at the same time, or if other rooms have been dismissed, the examinees must be accompanied by a proctor. Do not leave a test room unsupervised at any time. Okay, so if you have any questions on this, make sure you discuss that with your task coordinator.